Another Saturday, Sunday weekend is upon us, so I am making another video. So, wanted to thank the people who have watched and have subscribed. There's only two. My friend Sydney, thank you for subscribing. It means a lot. She's a very successful YouTuber as well, so it's nice to see that, and it's very encouraging. So, anywho, I had some difficulty coming up with what to talk about this week, because I definitely didn't want to phone in anything. So, sort of at the last minute, I kind of thought about something that I could talk about. So, today I want to talk about faith and religion and everything. I'm a Christian, so that influences a lot about what I write about, why I write, and that kind of thing. And I don't really necessarily want to give out a Billy Graham sermon about the importance of writing and all that kind of stuff. This is not really that venue or platform for something like that. What I wanted to talk about today was sort of how my religion and what I believe sort of influences how I write, and how I feel it's sort of a downplayed attribute of what we write about as authors. A lot of us don't really take for credit our beliefs, our presuppositions, our worldviews into what we write about. And it's really important because what you believe will strongly influence how you see the world, and part of writing is describing a world before you. So essentially how you see the world is going to reflect what ends up going in the final product of your book. I mentioned before that Spirit of Orin was a very personal project to me, and it was because it was a very religious one. I was going through a lot of stuff where I wasn't sure if I should be a Christian or stick it out or whatever, and so I stuck with it. And part of writing that book was confessions kind of unto myself, and just sort of me venting my frustration at what I was seeing. At that particular time, I thought I was going to become a pastor, so that didn't necessarily work out because I didn't really have the charisma and the gift for that kind of work, but still very much a strong believer, and I still very much believe what I still believe. So, but Spirit of Orin was just kind of a meditative project where I really had to get to the meat of what I believed, and a lot of my misgivings and anger was sort of poured out into that book. It was a very angry book, but also a very forgiving and cathartic book. So, certainly my religion, influenced the writing of an entire 500 something page book with 204,000 words. That's a lot. That's a monument in my life. It might not be the most polished and well-read monument, but it's still a monument. The editing process on it was insane. But how we see the world, what we believe, whatever you believe, it deeply influences your book. And I feel there's certain ways that you can either hopefully channel in to what you believe, and really use that to help fuel your book. And I think there's also really wrong ways to do it. I'm sure everyone's familiar with watching a Christian movie, or like VeggieTales, something that's blatantly and obliquely Christian. Like you've heard about it, and it's probably gets made fun of constantly whenever you think about it or see it. Like, you'll turn on like a show that's like a Christian show, and everything in it's very cheesy. it's very apparent that the show wants you to believe a certain thing. Like the show or the book or whatever form of media it is, it's very coercive. It's sort of setting up these very simplistic arguments and forwarding this notion that what you believe, whatever you believe, it's wrong, this is right, that kind of thing. I kind of liken it to when you go into like a movie. You probably saw like Jurassic Park this summer or something, or you saw like a major blockbuster or whatever. The first question that you always ask when you leave a movie theater is, so what did you think? You know, that is the basic that's the basic question that philosophers have been asking for centuries. The whole girth of Western civilization is founded on this principle of, so what did you think? This inward reflective notion that people ask questions because they're not trying to understand themselves, but they're trying to understand other people. And by understanding what other people think, that puts you in context in a society. So if I asked my friend what he thought of Jurassic Park, they're going to say like, oh, I thought it was great, or I thought it sucked, or something like that. Imagine how different the question would be if you posed to your friend, so what did you think about how the scientists were playing God and trying to manipulate genetics or whatever? See, that question is a bad question, I think, because that question supposes that that is the basic premise, that is what the movie's about. Essentially what you're doing is you're overriding the interpretive principle with that is founded on that question, that rests inside that question. So if you were to say that, it doesn't really give the person much of an answer, because now their input has been contaminated by your presence, your platform. The word escapes me at the moment, but your influence has made this question much more difficult to answer. It's no longer really a reflection of your input, but a reflection of another person's input threaded through your understanding. And so when you write a book, whatever you believe, if you're a Christian, or if you're Islamic, or if you're an atheist, or if you're a New Age, neo-pagan, or whatever, I find it utterly repulsive when people would write a book, or make a movie, or make anything, and force what they believe through the interpretive lens. Because that violates, I think, a foundational principle of who we are as people, what art means, how it's interpreted. And it's not fun, because then you feel like you're subjected to something. You're not viewing something, you're not observing something or taking something in, you're being subjected to it. It's not like an objective thing, it's a subjective thing. And I admit that a lot of what I did in Spirit of Orn was my worst fear, because I believe in one part of the book I have my main character sitting in on a sermon. Originally, when I was writing the book, I wanted this to be like a real sermon. And I wanted this to be like the preacher is preaching truth to this pagan, this agnostic, this atheist. And the main character's name, Khan's reaction to it is very abrasive. And the idea there originally was, well, Khan is reactionary. He's letting his baggage obstruct the meaning of the gospel or the meaning of Christianity, and this is partially his fault. And that was wrong. That was so wrong. And it took a few revisions and edits for me to realize, because I had to give it to friends and they had to tell me, like, this part's kind of like tongue-in-cheek or force-fed or whatever. And so I had to do a lot of extensive research into postmodern principles. So one of the things that I read was Letters from the Underground. I think it's like a Dostoevsky book, but it was a short read and it was talking about this guy, and it was very inward, very personable, but it was sort of like, it's very much, I think, considered one of the first really existential books, if not a very influential one. The idea was that this pathetic, pitiful character is struggling to be recognized. Like, he wants to be heard. There's an aspect in the book where there's this guard or this military officer that brushes through him and just steps through him as if he didn't even exist. And it completely wrecks this person. It completely, like, paralyzes him spiritually, that he would not be recognized as a person, as a human being. And a very large portion of the book is spent on him talking about and scheming how to get this person to notice that he's there. And finally he does. And all he can describe is this feeling of joy that he was recognized, that he was understood and affirmed. And that's sort of the character that I changed Khan into, because what happens to Khan in the story definitely imparts certain characteristics onto Khan. Khan becomes this person that is very much the product of his experiences. But I think the wrong thing to do, and this could go for any book again, in my particular instance, this is a Christian kind of philosophy that's sort of threaded throughout the book, but I wrongly blamed Khan and used his disbelief as almost like a weakness in his character, that his inability to believe was his fault, and that I didn't properly understand him as a character. Because that's a very selfish thing. I did the wrong thing doing that. Now, this can go in any other book. Like, say I was writing, not Mrs. Dalloway. There's a Virginia Woolf book. I forget which one it was, but it was about this group of travelers on this ship, and they are traveling through these islands. And at the end of the book, someone dies and everything. I'm really bad at these things, and I don't really like Virginia Woolf very much. But there was one part of the book that made me very angry, because Virginia Woolf becomes very selfish, and she uses this scene at this church, this lay Anglican church, to be this very shallow, old, stuffy expression of religion, which in many cases Anglicanism was. But I was very offended when I read it, because she was making a straw man out of Christianity and turning it into, like, well, this is what it is, over the whole scope of the world, every Christian is like this, because I want people to think this. I want people to come away with this idea that this is the way it is. which I think is really selfish. I firmly believe that you can write a book where there is a philosophical agenda that is open enough to consider other viewpoints, that is able to recognize that other viewpoints are there. Like, I can still write Spirit of Orn, or I still wrote Spirit of Orn, where I gave a supremacy, like an aspect of supremacy to Christianity, where clearly the book is about Christianity and it's about my experiences with Christianity. But it wasn't taking that supremacy of being a Christian and making that like the victory song of the whole book, but sort of talking about how Christianity exists within a wide world with many diverse opinions and input, and how, and this is like a theological thing, but if we're all made in the image and likeness of God, and God made the world and it was good, there's still good aspects to humanity, and not in the sense of like a moral capacity to do good, but there are aspects of humanity that reflect the divine nature of who we were made and what we are meant to be. There are certain aspects of Nordic paganism that do get some things right, believe it or not, in terms of Christianity and how they see the divine. There's a few things in there that are sort of right. It's mostly in cosmology and how they view the world. So it is of great value to, when you come into a book, to assess your worldview and to assess what you believe, because what you believe will determine how this book ultimately ends up being written. While the greatest task of an author is to separate yourself from what you're writing, to make your characters more authentic and to make your characters more unique, we underestimate the power that we have over our stories as authors. Even though an author can separate himself from a book that they're writing, the product, the ultimate product, is based off of the original spark of, I'm going to go write a book. It's going to be about this because I'm passionate about this, or I want to hear a story about this. Something about you willed that book into existence, and something about you kept you going. That despite all the obstacles and all the things blocking your way, all the hardship of editing, all the hardship of designing and marketing, that you've taken 4 years of your life and poured it into this one product that may or may not even sell, but you did it anyways and you believed in it. That is where the author influences their books. And there's nothing more abhorrent than writing a book where, rather than sharing a story and sharing a narrative and creating a creative space to explore a universe of characters and forcing an agenda down someone's throat when they're reading it. A great example of this might be C.S. Lewis, who created very beloved tales, but the Chronicles of Narnia just never really struck me as very interesting because it's too theological. It's too in your face. If I wanted to read about the crucifixion, I would just read the Bible. It's a better story. But with the Chronicles of Narnia, he's creating this story where everything's all wink, wink, do you get it? Do you get it? Because it's about this kind of thing. I like Tolkien's use of sharing his worldview within a greater narrative that's bigger than him. I like the way that he does it because, for instance, Tolkien was a Christian. He was Catholic, Christian, same thing. He believed in Jesus. And it's everywhere in The Lord of the Rings. One of the biggest examples is there must always be a king. The throne of Gondor, the seat, is empty. And there's a steward of Gondor, but not a king of Gondor. There is no king over man. There's no consolidation, unruliness. The king of Gondor is supposed to be Jesus, essentially. But through reading The Lord of the Rings, you would never get that. You would never understand this need for a king. But you would feel the pain and the turmoil of these peoples of Middle-earth, and you would understand something about that. You would understand why these people would think something like that. And that's because there must always be a king. And little do they know, they're actually hearing kind of a big aspect of the gospel. And there's plenty of other books sort of like it. I mean, I really liked Lathe of Heaven. It's a science fiction novel, and it sort of explores aspects of like the I Ching and Taoism and everything like that, and kind of New Age spirituality, Eastern spirituality. My familiarity with those things isn't really that, deep, I guess. It's something that I've always wanted to learn about, but never got around to doing it. But it's a good story. It doesn't feel like the author is shoving a message down my throat and saying, this is the way to be. This is the right worldview. So my encouragement to you all is that if you write something, take a step back and really dig deep and ask yourself, why are you writing it? That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, now that you've started writing something, don't take away the interpretive lens or the interpretive significance of your reader. Let your reader look at your book and take something out of it that maybe you didn't intend. Because that's when a book is really great. When you have an opportunity to read something that you've never read before and really explore it. And really come away with it with different outlooks on life and everything. That facilitates a dialogue. If you go, the book's about this, get it, this scene is this kind of thing. If you do that, then you're really just making a monologue as opposed to a dialogue. So that's just my 2 cents. I felt kind of called to say something about that this week. So I hope you found it nice to hear about it. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for showing up, watching my video. If you made it all the way through the end, thank you very much for paying attention and hearing my little confessionals about writing and being an author. And if you enjoyed what you liked, please subscribe. Tell your friends about me. Again, this is more of a personal project for me, but if you found my advice helpful and think it'd be helpful for other people, by all means share it, because if I can help out more people with my advice, then I'm very happy to do that. So anyways, I hope you're all having a great weekend. I will hopefully see you next week. So yeah, thanks for listening. I'm signing off.